My name is Grace Whitmore, and I was raised to mistake silence for holiness. I grew up under the watchful eye of my father, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, pastor of the First Baptist Church of Willow Creek, a small town in the Midwest. Too small for secrets, yet big enough for expectations. From an early age, my life was neatly folded like the linen napkins at communion, clean, orderly, with no room for mistakes. I knew how to pray, smile, and lower my eyes. I knew exactly what was expected of me, to be sweet, devout, and obedient, and for a long time I was, until the night a storm tore through the sky and swept away what little blind faith I had left. I can't say what made me leave the chapel at that moment. Maybe the wind whispered louder than the hymns, or maybe my heart, tired of praying for something that never came, decided to walk on its own. That's when I saw him, standing in the shadow of the storage shed behind the church, his body soaked, his eyes lowered but alert. Caleb Morgan. A name I wouldn't learn until later, but one that already carried a strange weight, as if I recognized it from a life I hadn't lived. He didn't seem to be asking for shelter, nor did he offer explanations. He just stood there, still, while the world around us dissolved into rain and lightning, and I, the pastor's daughter, trained to keep my distance from anything impure, crossed through the downpour as if that choice no longer belonged to me. He looked at me like no one ever had, not with desire or judgment, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, as if he were trying to figure out why a girl like me still existed. We stood there for long minutes, surrounded by wind and darkness, and something inside me, something old, maybe forgotten, stirred. I didn't know what it was. I just felt it, a new restlessness, a strange warmth, an urge to say what I'd never had the courage to voice. Caleb didn't say much that night, but the little he did was enough to shatter the glass dome my world had been built inside. And in the middle of the storm, with the town sinking into mud and sirens wailing in the distance, I knew this wouldn't just be a bad night. It would be the beginning of the end of everything I'd known as truth. The next day, the town looked like an overwashed photograph, as if the rain had erased more than just mud on fallen leaves. People moved in silence, repairing fences, picking up branches, thanking God they'd been spared. But I carried a different kind of damage inside me. It wasn't visible, wasn't physical. It was a crack no one else seemed to notice because smiling and nodding had become as natural to me as breathing. But I knew something in me had been out of place since the night before, something that wouldn't fit back together no matter how hard I tried. Caleb didn't show up that morning or the next, but his name, still unknown to me, lingered in my thoughts like an echo trapped between my ribs. Back at the parsonage, my father prayed louder than usual. He said the storm was a sign that the community needed to come together in fasting and prayer, that evil lurked nearby, disguised as distractions, desires, and doubts. I watched his hands, clenched around the Bible as if he could stop the world from slipping through his fingers. He didn't know, but he sensed it. He sensed something in me had changed, and so he started talking more about purity, sin, and protecting the hearts of daughters. His words hit me like rain against glass, noise on the outside, but unable to reach me within. That afternoon, I left without saying a word. I walked through the muddy streets, my shoes sinking into the storm's remnants, until I reached the old town library, which doubled as an emergency shelter. And there, among stacked boxes and donated blankets, he was, Caleb. Sitting on the floor, reading some random book, his hair still damp, his eyes lowered as if he didn't care to be noticed. But he noticed me, and this time he smiled. Small, almost imperceptible smile, but so real it threw something inside me off balance. I sat beside him without thinking. We didn't say anything for long minutes. It wasn't necessary. The silence between us was comfortable, as if it had been rehearsed long before we existed. He asked my name. I told him. Then he said his. Caleb. Morgan. It sounded solid, like someone who knew exactly who they were, even without a place to belong. We spoke little, but everything we said was raw. No masks, no detours, no filter of trying to seem righteous. It was the first time someone listened to me without trying to shape me. When I stood to leave, he said just one sentence. His voice low but so clear, it stayed with me until I fell asleep. You don't seem to be where you want to be. I walked home with my knees muddy and my heart beating slowly as if it wanted to savor every pulse of that afternoon. And there, in the quiet of my room, I realized something had started. Not a fairy tale romance, but a fracture. A crack that let in for the first time the possibility of wanting another life. That night I tried praying like I had since I was a kid. The same words as always, hands clasped as my father taught me, eyes closed waiting for that warm peace that used to wrap around me. But all that came was silence, a thick, uncomfortable silence, as if God were listening from far away or waiting for me to say something else, something truer. I let my hands fall to my lap, and instead of praying, I stared out my bedroom window, watching the world darken outside as something lit up inside. I thought of Caleb, the way he spoke little but with conviction, the way he looked at me without hurry, like he had nothing to prove. And for the first time, I thought honestly that maybe I was tired of being good. The next morning I went back to the shelter under the pretense of helping with supplies. My mother gave me that grateful, unquestioning smile, happy to see her daughter serving the community. My father just nodded as if my actions were an answer to his prayers. But it wasn't charity driving me back. It was something I couldn't, yet name, only feel pulling me. Caleb was there, folding blankets, and when he saw me, he raised his eyebrows slightly as if he'd known I'd return. We spent the afternoon in small gestures, stacking boxes, handing out water bottles, organizing, lists of names. Sometimes we exchanged glances, sometimes stray words, but time felt different near him, less rushed, less watched. Slowly our conversations grew. We talked about his childhood, the solo road trips he'd taken, the grandmother who raised him until she passed. He listened when I told him about the rules at home, about what it was like to carry a last name that had to seem holy. He didn't react with pity or shock. He just listened. And that was new, revolutionary. One day, near dusk, I said I felt like frosted glass. Everyone could see me, but no one really saw me. He replied that I seemed more like a clear mirror, one that scared people who didn't want to face their own reflection. After that, I didn't say anything more. I just held on to his words like something I wasn't sure I deserved. I started coming home later. The excuse was the shelter work, and it was partly true. But the real reason was Caleb, and the way I felt about myself when I was near him, fearless, unframed, free of memorized prayers. My mother said I seemed lighter. My father started asking questions, small ones almost disguised. Who else is helping there? Reverend Jones mentioned he saw you talking to a young man. I answered little, changed the subject, but I felt the walls closing in, and with them my heart splitting between two worlds that no longer fit together. The night everything blew up, there was no lightning, no rain, just a tense calm, as if the air were holding its breath before screaming. I was lying in bed when I heard my father arguing with my mother downstairs. Words like dishonor, influence, sin floated through the walls. Then he came upstairs, knocked on my door harder than usual, looked at me with that pastor's stare, not a father's, asked me straight questions. "Are you involved with that boy?" And for the first time in my life, I didn't lie to protect him. "I've got something, I don't know what it is, but it's mine, and it's not a sin." He didn't respond, just closed the door with a silence that hurt more than any shout. And that's how the world that shaped me began to crumble. Not with a scandal, but with a choice. Quiet, firm, non-negotiable. The next morning, the house was too quiet. My mother set the breakfast table with her eyes down, her movements slower than usual, as if the silverware carried the weight of stone. My father didn't show up. I felt his absence like a cold cut in the air. No note, no prayer, no demands. Just the space he left, filled with a tension that seemed to grow in the walls. I ate little, said I'd head to the shelter to help. My mother just nodded like she knew she couldn't stop me anymore. At the door she hesitated, touched my arm gently but said nothing, and I understood. She was torn too, between the woman she'd been before marriage and the one she'd been taught to be after. When I met Caleb, he looked at me differently. Not with surprise, but with a restrained sadness, as if he knew that by choosing to return, I was already paying a price. We didn't talk about my father, or the night before. We spent the day sorting donations, cleaning the shed, exchanging glances that said more than any words. There was something different in me. I knew it. It was like I was seeing myself, from the inside for the first time. No filters, no fear. And at the same time, it was terrifying. Like walking barefoot on unfamiliar ground. Later, Caleb took me to an abandoned building on the edge of town. Said he used to go there when he needed to think. The place was quiet, half forgotten, smelling of old wood and wind. We sat on the floor, him with his knees up, eyes on the horizon. He told me things I didn't expect to hear, that he'd been through too many towns, that he never stayed anywhere because whenever he tried, someone reminded him of where he came from, not what he wanted to be. He talked about an absent father, a mother who vanished when he was still a kid, the years he felt invisible even while screaming inside. Then he looked at me and said, "You listen to me like I matter." And I wanted to say he did matter. But my voice wouldn't come. We stayed there until the sun started to dip. I didn't want to go back, not out of fear of reprimand, but because I knew stepping through that door again would mean nothing would be the same. When I got home, my father was waiting, sitting at the table, Bible open, hands clasped like the world depended on his next sentence. He asked me to sit, started talking about choices, about the weight of the name we carried, about the community's expectations, the honor of the ministry, the family's image. I listened, in silence. He didn't yell, but every word was a sermon, a reminder of what I was supposed to be. At the end, he asked, "Do you really want to risk all this for someone you barely know?" And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. It's not about him, it's about me. There was a long silence. Then he stood, said he'd pray for me. But in his tone, I heard what he didn't say. "You're on your own now." I went to my room with a tight but steady heart. That night, I didn't pray. I opened the window, lay down with the breeze on my face, and let the tears come. Not from regret, but from relief. For the first time, they didn't make me feel weak. They made me feel alive. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope between two worlds. In the mornings, I still sat at the kitchen table, sipped the bitter coffee my mother made in silence, and pretended not to notice the growing void between us. My father no longer spoke to me directly. He spoke at me, never with me. His sentences little sermons disguised as advice, laced with Bible references and looks that weighed more than any punishment. Still, I went to the shelter every day. And there, I could breathe. Caleb stayed the same, quiet, attentive, with a presence that didn't need to announce itself. Sometimes he waited for me outside, sitting on the stone wall with a coffee in hand and a book on his lap. Other times, he was already inside, organizing boxes or helping the kids draw with crayons. I watched him in silence, as if unraveling. That mystery could help me understand what was happening inside me. Slowly, the line between admiration and feeling blurred, but I still didn't say anything. Not to him, not to myself. Maybe out of fear of naming something so fragile, so new, that any word might break it. But it was one late afternoon, when he asked me to walk with him without saying where we were going, that something shifted. We followed a hidden trail behind the old schoolhouse, and after a few minutes he stopped and showed me a tree he'd marked with a strange symbol, a kind of incomplete circle, like something was missing to close it. "Sometimes that's how I feel," he said, eyes fixed on the trunk, like I came into the world with a piece missing. I stood there beside him, not knowing what to say, and when he turned and looked at me, his eyes shadowed by the canopy, he spoke so softly I almost didn't hear. "But when I'm with you, it feels like that piece exists." My chest tightened, not from the words themselves, but from the quiet offering in them. It was like he'd placed his heart in my hands, without demanding anything back. I didn't answer with words. I just took his hand, and in that silent touch, there was more confession than any declaration. We walked back to town unhurried, fingers laced, carrying the certainty that something had changed, not on the outside, but within. Something had been planted between us, and even without a name, it was already taking root. But while what existed between us grew quietly, the world around me seemed to shrink. People started talking. Glances followed me in the grocery store aisles. Whispers echoed from church pews. The pastor's daughter walking with the guy who came with the storm. Someone left a pamphlet with verses about temptation in my shelter locker. Another day my mother showed up there feigning surprise, but her eyes already knew. She asked with cutting softness if Caleb was being kind to me. I said he was the only one being honest. That night my father was waiting in the living room, said the church would vote on his tenure as leader if certain things weren't resolved, that everything we'd built was at risk, that my behavior was staining not just my name, but God's. I listened to it all. Then with a calm voice, calmer than I thought I could manage, I replied, "Maybe what's at risk isn't faith. Maybe it's just pride." He didn't answer, just stood and left. And I stayed there, feeling for the first time that even amid loss, I'd gained something no one could take, my own voice. By the end of that month, I no longer knew where Grace, the pastor's daughter, ended, and the other Grace, the one who listened to her own conscience, who walked with steps that didn't ask permission, began. The two lived in me like sisters raised under the same roof, but taught to see the world through different windows. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they embraced in silence. But that late afternoon, as I walked alone down the dirt road to the lake, I realized one would have to let the other go. Caleb was there, as always, waiting not for answers, but for presence. We sat by the water's edge, and he said it might be time for him to leave. Not out of fear, he said, but because he'd already stirred too much noise in a place where silence was tradition. I stayed quiet, not from indifference, but because my chest ached like it was being pried open. I looked at him, at that face I'd learned to recognize, even with my eyes closed, and said with a trembling voice that he wasn't the problem. That maybe the problem was what we represented: change, truce, a desire for something beyond what we'd been taught to accept. He took my hand, this time with resolve, said he admired me more than he could explain, that he saw me as someone who fought with her heart laid bare and still didn't give up on loving, that if he left, he'd carry all of me with him. His words hit me like a tide that didn't drown me, but cleansed me. That's when I cried in front of him for the first time. Not from pain, but from fear of losing the truest thing I'd felt in a long time. And when he pulled me close and held me, I realized what was between us couldn't be undone. It wasn't fleeting passion or rebellion. It was something that had weathered the storm and everyone's gaze. The next day, I found my mother on the porch with red eyes. She held the Bible like someone clinging to a memory too good to let go. She called me by my full name, Grace Ann Whitmore, and said she'd heard the things people were saying. She didn't speak of punishment or shame. She spoke of love, of letting go, of fighting in silence, of losing yourself trying to keep others whole. She told me she'd once loved someone she couldn't have, and that she chose my father because she thought faith was the same as safety. She asked me to be kind but firm, to love but not forget who I was. I wanted to say I was trying, but it still hurt. She looked at me with tenderness and said, "Hurting doesn't mean it's wrong. It means you're feeling it fully." That night I sat on my bed with my heart torn between leaving with Caleb and staying to face the consequences, between saving myself or saving what was left of the bridge with my father. I knew nothing would be easy, that real choices always come at a cost. But there, wrapped in my room's silence, I realized I'd made my choice long ago. I just had to accept it. And whichever path I took, I wouldn't walk it with my eyes closed anymore. The morning everything was decided, there was no clear sign from fate, no voice whispering what to do. Just silence. A calm, dense, mature silence. The kind that comes when pain stops screaming and starts teaching. I put on my shoes slowly, each knot tied like it sealed a goodbye I didn't yet know how to give. The mirror showed me a reflection that, for the first time, didn't seek approval. I looked the same as always. Hair tied back, simple dress, tired eyes. But inside, something had been remade, as if what had broken in me had rearranged itself into a new shape, with less fear and more truth. I found Caleb where he was always most himself, on the edge between the town and the world. His backpack said it all. He was ready to move on, with or without me. When I approached, he turned slowly as if he didn't want to pressure me with hope. His look wasn't demanding. It was acceptance before I even answered. And that hurt, more than if he'd begged. Because Caleb always understood, even without understanding everything. And when he asked if I was ready, my yes came with a crack in my voice. But it wasn't a yes to go. It was a yes to stay, to not run from myself, my name, my story, or the town that tried to trap me and shaped me without knowing. It also taught me to resist. We didn't say much. I told him part of me wanted to run, that it would have been easier to hit the road beside him and start over somewhere else, without a last name, without a past, without judgment. But easy was never the same as right, and I needed to figure out who I was where it all started suffocating me. He just nodded, didn't argue. He hugged me with both arms and let the silence between us speak louder than any declaration. His chest trembled against mine, and I felt it. He loved me, but the love he offered wasn't a cage. It was a push. Freedom. He let me go gently and said, his voice low and rough, "Be free, even if that means being far from me." I watched Caleb leave without looking back. And I didn't wait for him to turn around, because part of truly loving someone is accepting that love knows how to leave when staying would erase what they fought so hard to find. I walked home with dry eyes and a soaked soul. My father was on the porch, Bible closed in his lap, head bowed, shoulders slumped, not from age but from the weight of the silence between us. When I got close, he didn't stand right away. After a while, he looked into my eyes and said only, "You're stronger than I expected." It was the closest to an apology I'd get, and maybe it was enough. I sat beside him, not as a daughter seeking blessing, but as someone who could finally exist in her own skin, even if he didn't yet know how to embrace it. Sundays came back. I still went to church, but with a different gaze. The hymns were the same, the words from the pulpit still carried weight, but now I didn't absorb everything. I filtered, I questioned, and that didn't pull me away from faith. It brought me closer. Because for the first time, my faith came from within, not from imposition. It came from silence, not fear. It came from love, not guilt. From Caleb, I kept soft memories and a firm certainty. He was the wind that carried away my dry leaves. He didn't stay, but he left space for new ones to grow. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, when the sky darkens, out of nowhere I think of him, but not with pain, with gratitude. Today I am Grace Whitmore, the pastor's daughter, the woman who dared to question, the girl who stayed, and who, by staying, learned to walk on her own 2 feet, not to please, but to be whole, by choice, for love, for me. Some people still look at me with the same old judgment. In the grocery store line, in the church pews, in the clipped tone of certain neighbors who call me brave girl with smiles that don't reach their eyes. Others, curiously, have started to draw closer. Teens who used to avoid me, older, women who now greet me with a kindness that carries something unsaid. Maybe admiration, maybe relief at seeing someone finally say what many thought their whole lives. I never set out to be an example of anything. But I learned that sometimes just staying standing says enough. My mother watches me again like she did when I was little, with quiet tenderness, but also a new kind of respect. She started listening more. She's shared stories from her youth she never dared tell before, and I realized the woman inside her was always there, stifled between Bible pages and Sunday smiles. Now she lets more of that woman slip out. She hugs me tighter, asks less and listens more, doesn't push me to change my mind, just stands by me in silence. And that, to me, is love enough. My father remains who he is, still preaches with fervor, still quotes verses when he doesn't know how to answer. But there's something in his eyes that's softened, maybe acceptance. He no longer tries to correct me when I speak with conviction. He doesn't interrupt to pray when I ask uncomfortable questions. We're still distant in many ways, but there's a bridge between us now, made of sticks and rope, yes, but strong enough to cross without falling. Sometimes that's all you can hope for, between two such different worlds. And I go on, one step at a time, with days of doubt and days of clarity, with Caleb's memory tucked in a quiet corner of my chest, where it no longer hurts, just warms. I keep helping at the shelter. I write at night, scribbling thoughts in notebooks I hide under my bed. Sometimes I think about leaving one day, seeing what's beyond the borders of the town that shaped me. But today, here, I feel free. Not because nothing holds me back, but because everything that once did now knows me inside out. And still, I remain. Life hasn't turned into poetry. The storms haven't stopped. But now I know, no matter what comes, I won't live with my feet tied to someone else's ground again. I am Grace Ann Whitmore, and at last I am mine.